Hello, wrestling fans. So now we are going to talk about the rest of WrestleMania 2. So I was leaving off with the Fabulous Moolah versus Velvet McIntyre for the World Wrestling Federation Women's title, and how in December of 1985, which is 4 months prior to this event, which was April 2nd of 1980, April 7th, 1986, Wendy Richter, one of the most forgotten parts of this history. Wendy Richter was on fire in terms of box office in the wrestling world. Women's wrestling had traditionally been pretty much an afterthought, just a kind of a side attraction in wrestling cards. With the help of Cyndi Lauper and the WWF promotional machine, Wendy Richter became a pretty big star in the WWF. Crossover appeal because of being being linked up with Cyndi Lauper in what they call the Rock and Wrestling connection, in her match against the Fabulous Moolah in July of 1984, called The Brawl to Settle It All, was broadcast on MTV. And I believe she even had a match at the War to Settle the Score that was broadcast on MTV, I think losing the title to Leilani Kai. And then, of course, she was the semifinal. Semifinal means not the main event, but right under the main event in WrestleMania 1 against winning the title back from Leilani Kai. Well, apparently there was some dispute in terms of money or whatever it was, contract, merchandising, but Wendy Richter basically lost the title. Vince basically had her lose the title in December of '85 in Madison Square Garden. There's rumors to see if whether that was some people say that was a double cross. I personally don't think so, because Wendy had to know that was the Fabulous Moolah under the mask of Spider Lady. I just think she lost the title to her, but definitely it wasn't a pleasant situation. Well, by this time in WrestleMania 2, Fabulous Moolah, who's 28 times women's champion, was the leader of the women's stable of wrestlers that would provide the territories with female wrestlers, and she was the champion by this time. So that's just some background on by WrestleMania 2. Unfortunately, Wendy Richter was no longer even in the WWF, but she had a great run. I met her actually at Universal Studios in 1985. They were doing this promotion where they were promoting the LGN wrestling toys of the WWF, and every child under 12 got a free WWF action figure. And we got to meet the wrestlers, and I got to meet Hillbilly Jim and Wendy Richter. So, to round out the card at the Rosemont Horizon, you have Corporal Kirshner versus Nikolai Volkov. Pretty much, Corporal Kirshner was just a poor man's replacement for Sergeant Slaughter, who had been in the WWF in '83 and '84, and had had a big babyface turn and became a super over patriotic babyface. He left in December of '84 for much of the same reason Wendy Richter did, over merchandising. Um, and so they have Corporal Kirshner. Basically, it was called a flag match against Nikolai Volkov. Winner gets to raise the flag, their flag, kind of a just a wasted match. Then you had the 20-man battle royal. Was the big draw for the Rosemont Horizon because it involved several National Football League players, and very prominent players. William Perry, the refrigerator, who was just coming off the Super Bowl victory in 1985, and he became a household name in 1985 because he was a defensive tackle that they would put in at fullback in certain goal line situations. The Chicago Bears, Bill Fralick, several big names, Ed Too Tall Jones, and then of course Andre the Giant won the Battle Royal. So as far as Battle Royals go, that was pretty cool because you had some NFL football players. Ernie Holmes was one of them, famous Pittsburgh Steeler, and Andre wins the match. And the main event is the British Bulldogs against Greg Valentine and Brutus Beefcake, who had defeated Barry Windham and Mike Rotundo of the U.S. Express for the tag titles in October or November of 1985. And the U.S. Express, Windham and Rotundo would leave shortly thereafter. Well, this match was one of the best matches of the Supercards that season, and probably a lot of people think it's the best match of WrestleMania 2. And you have the British. It was a real good match. Greg Valentine and Brutus Beefcake. They were called the Dream Team. Greg Valentine, the veteran, great worker, great heel. Brutus Beefcake, kind of limited in his work rate, but he had a great gimmick. And they lost to the British Bulldogs, one of the best tag teams, but it was short-lived because we know later on in 1986, Dynamite Kid would have a debilitating back injury that really shelved that team in terms of greatness. They still would tag together, but they weren't the same. But this was a great match, and the British Bulldogs captured the WWF World Tag Team title. Now, I've covered all the matches in terms of just briefly mentioning them. Going to Hulk Hogan, King Kong Bundy in the cage. Again, a lot of people at this time were expecting it to be Hogan and Savage, so they rushed an angle in February, Saturday night's main event, where Bundy, after a title match between Hogan and Morocco, Bundy attacked Hogan and did the splash on him against the turnbuckle. Hogan, they had to wrap his ribs. And so that was the quick angle to bring in this match. And I'll be honest with you, despite it not being Savage and Hogan, Bundy at this time was at his peak in terms of his heel WWF run. He was at his peak. He had the record-breaking pin over SD Jones at the first WrestleMania. So he had an aura about him at this time. And I actually, watching the match, I was 12 years old at this time. I actually thought Bundy could win the title. So it was a very good match. Hogan gets a lot of criticism for his work rate, but he knew how to work when he had to put the working shoes on. I think the biggest criticism of Hogan at this time were 5-minute routine title matches, but he really did good in this match with Bundy, and it was a really good match. But again, there's a lot of criticism of this WrestleMania, and PWI mentions it here. It says they had several celebrities, I think 25 celebrities involved, where they had 6 in the first WrestleMania. The ticket prices went anywhere from $15 to $100, okay? And again, in here and in this article by PWI, when they recap WrestleMania, they say the 2 matches that will be memorable are the British Bulldogs defeating Greg Valentine and Brutus Beefcake, and Hulk Hogan's cage match victory over King Kong Bundy. Okay? And of course, they lament, as I did, Orndorff against Morocco, and they also lament Savage versus George the Animal Still. They said this was made available. This was scheduled for over 200 closed circuit locations around the country. Made available by the WWF on home cable systems through pay-per-view television in 192 markets nationwide. Definitely an increase from 1985. Okay, and they came out with a video cassette by the end of May, which was only like a month, almost 2 months after the actual event. But again, there was a lot of criticism of the card because of the 3 locations. None of those locations sold out. The bad matchmaking, and that, and the overabundance of celebrities. So one of the things they said that they note that the Rosemont Horizon was nearly half empty. It seated 18,000. They said the WWF was quoted in several newspapers as claiming closed-circuit audience of 1.4 million fans. And we know they always beefed up the figures, right? A pay-per-view audience of 800,000 homes. And they said it was virtually impossible to verify the closed-circuit number. Now, the thing is, no matter what the actual take-home was for the WWF at this event, you have to realize that by this point in time, Vince had really created other streams of income. Merchandising was big. whether it was the video cassettes, the T-shirts, and all the other things. What else? He had the WWF cartoon, which wouldn't last too much longer after this, but they had a cartoon. And so they pretty much were the brand name of pro wrestling by this point in time. WrestleMania 1 solidified them as the brand name, and then by WrestleMania 2, they're living off of that. They're living off that exposure. Now, by WrestleMania 2, you see that the WWF, they're about to go through some changes after WrestleMania 2. They would go through a down period of attendance for a few months after WrestleMania 2. And a lot of the wrestlers that really were instrumental in the WWF's national expansion after WrestleMania 2 start to get stale. And we're talking about Big John Studd. The Junkyard Dog, who I mentioned at this time was at his peak in terms of box office. The Iron Sheik and Nikolai Volkov, Sheik is the one who beat Backlund for the WWF World Title and lost to Hogan, setting Hulkamania ablaze in the WWF because he was already big in the AWA. King Kong Bundy. So you'll see after WrestleMania 2 that the attendance, they're having attendance issues, creativity issues. Roddy Piper leaves after this to go film Body Slam, so he's gone for a few months. So WrestleMania 2 is kind of like the final hurrah of the Rock and Wrestling era. Although it was pretty much done by this point, the Rock and Wrestling era, you would say, is from like the spring of 84 or summer, spring, summer of 84, all the way through its peak probably, when Wendy Richter loses the title, December of 85, because at that time, Hogan was still feuding with Piper. You had Orndorff feuding with Piper. But by this point in time, it's pretty much done, but the last remnant of it is Mr. T against Roddy Piper. And Piper, when he comes back, you'll see there's a big change in his character. So this is really the final hurrah of the Rock and Wrestling era. And a lot of things are going to change in the WWF after this. A lot of the guys that were, like I said, instrumental in the national expansion start to take on a lesser role. They had kind of reached their peak by this point in time and then start a downward trek. So we're going to see that. I'll talk more about that in future vids. So we're done looking at WrestleMania 2. Next, we're going to talk about, and we're going to do this on another video, the Jim Crockett Senior Memorial Cup Tag Team Tournament, April 19th, 1986, the Superdome in New Orleans, and it was held in two cards, one in the afternoon, one in the evening. We're going to talk about that. That's going to be interesting. I'm going to love talking about that because there's so much about that card that was political and really showed how things were going in that part of the country in terms of the wrestling popularity in New Orleans, Louisiana. All right, man. See, till next time. It's kayfabe all day.